Dusty discovery. The sun beat down on Hank's back, a persistent, unyielding hammer against his worn denim shirt. Sweat tracked rivulets through the fine dust coating his skin, but his hands moved with practiced efficiency, tightening a loose strand of barbed wire. The scent of sun-baked earth and distant sage filled the air, a familiar perfume of the open range. He'd been out since dawn, mending fences that stretched across his vast, quiet ranch, a solitary figure against the boundless sky. Dust devils, miniature cyclones of grit and dry grass, danced on the horizon, harmless and fleeting. He barely registered them, his focus on the task at hand. A flicker of movement, something more substantial than a wisp of dust, caught his eye. It was far off, near the skeletal remains of the old Miller farm, a place scorched clean by a wildfire years ago, a monument to loss. He squinted, shielding his eyes with a calloused hand. The heat shimmered, distorting the view, but the anomaly persisted. It wasn't an animal, too tall, too still. A fallen tree, perhaps? But the Miller place had been stripped bare. A prickle of unease, faint but persistent, urged him to investigate. He swung a leg over his horse, Buck, a steady roan whose coat was as dusty as Hank's own. "Easy, boy," he murmured, nudging the horse into a slow trot. The distance seemed to shrink with agonizing slowness, the shimmering air playing tricks with his perception. As he drew closer, the shape resolved itself. It was human. And far too tall to be anyone he knew. Dismounting a few yards away, Hank approached cautiously, his hand instinctively resting on the pistol grip at his hip. The figure lay sprawled amidst the charred rubble, a splash of deep crimson against the muted browns and grays. Her skin was a rich, burnished copper, her long, dark hair spread like a fan around her head. She was dressed in buckskin, intricately beaded, but torn in places, revealing a deep gash on her leg. Her face, even in unconsciousness, held a fierce, almost regal beauty, framed by high cheekbones and a strong jawline. She was easily a head taller than Hank, a towering presence even in repose. He knelt, his gaze sweeping for any sign of danger. Her breathing was shallow, a faint whisper against the oppressive silence. A slow, steady thump in her chest. Alive. He gently touched her neck, checking for a pulse. Strong and steady, despite her injuries. Who was she? And what had brought such a woman, so obviously Apache, so far from her people, to this desolate, burnt-out place? A discovery as unsettling as it was compelling. A night of watching. As twilight drained from the sky, Hank carefully, almost reverently, lifted Nehemina. Her unconscious form, surprisingly light, held an undeniable gravity. He draped her across his horse's saddle, supporting her with one arm while guiding the animal with the other. The journey back to the ranch house was deliberate, marked only by the whisper of leather and the soft percussion of hooves on parched earth. Each subtle jolt sent a fresh tremor of concern through him. Inside the modest dwelling, a fire already crackled. He settled her gently on the worn sofa, positioning a thick woolen blanket to cushion her head. Her breathing, though shallow, remained steady. He dampened a clean cloth in cool well water, dabbing it tenderly on her forehead before attempting to offer a small cup to her lips. She remained unresponsive. Drawing an old, groaning chair close, he sat, elbows on his knees, simply observing. The oil lamp painted the walls with dancing shadows, bathing her face in amber and sepia. He noted the intricate braid of her dark hair, the high, strong curve of her cheekbones, the faint scar tracing a line above her left eyebrow. She was unlike anyone he had ever encountered, a mystery delivered to his doorstep by the unforgiving wild. His mind cycled through the image of her lying broken, the raw fragility that had resonated deep within him. Hours stretched. The wind sighed around the eaves, a lonely sound that typically offered solace but tonight only intensified his disquiet. He stoked the fire, its rising warmth a meager shield against the night's chill and the deeper cold of his own apprehension. He considered his obligation, this unexpected charge. He wasn't a man for grand gestures or eloquent pronouncements, but one of quiet devotion, a steadfast presence. Tonight, that was his offering. He watched for any flutter of an eyelid, any subtle shift in her features. The house's silence was profound, broken only by the fire's crackle and the fragile cadence of her breath, a testament to life. He would not sleep. He would keep vigil. Awakening eyes. A sliver of dawn, pale and tentative, pierced the gloom of the cabin. Nahimina's eyes fluttered open, heavy lids resisting the light. For a long moment, she lay still, the ache in her muscles a dull throb, a counterpoint to the soft rustle of the blanket against her skin. Confusion was a fleeting shadow, quickly dispelled by an innate calm. She was somewhere unfamiliar, yet an absence of fear settled deep within her. Her gaze, slow and deliberate, drifted across the rough-hewn timbers of the ceiling, then to the sturdy walls. Her eyes finally landed on the man sitting quietly by the hearth. Hank. He was watching her, his expression unreadable, a silent sentinel. His hands, large and calloused, rested on his knees. He saw her stir, saw her eyes meet his. A small, almost imperceptible nod was his only greeting. He rose slowly, his movements economical, and approached the cot. He held out a wooden bowl filled with a thick, steaming stew and a cup of water. He offered them with a careful gesture, then pointed to his mouth, then to the bowl, then back to her. He repeated the motion with the water, his brown eyes earnest. Nahimina watched his attempts, her mind piecing together his intent. She understood. Her stomach, a hollow cavern, rumbled in agreement. She reached out, her fingers still weak, but her grip steady as she took the bowl and cup. The scent of wild herbs and venison was a balm to her senses. Hank eased back, giving her space, but remained close enough to observe. He watched her bring the spoon to her lips, saw the faint tremor in her hand. She ate slowly, deliberately, each mouthful a measured intake of sustenance. The warmth spread through her, chasing away the lingering chill. The water was cool and pure, washing down the hearty stew. She felt strength, like a nascent flame, begin to flicker within her. She met his gaze again, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. A different kind of warmth, something akin to gratitude, began to unfurl in her chest. Helping hands. The crisp autumn air, once a biting torment, now felt invigorating as Nahimina's body slowly shed its weariness. Days bled into weeks, each sunrise painting the sky with hues of amber and rose, each sunset ushering in a quiet, star-dusted peace. The deep gash on her arm had closed, leaving a faint, silvery line, and the ache in her bones had receded, replaced by a returning vigor. Hank, ever watchful, noticed the subtle changes, the way she moved with less hesitation, the renewed glint in her dark eyes. One brisk morning, as Hank wrestled with a stubborn fence post near the south pasture, a shadow fell over him. He straightened, wiping sweat from his brow, to see Nahimina standing silently. She held a thick leather strap, retrieved from a pile of discarded tack. Without a word, she knelt, her strong hands deftly tightening the loose wire he'd been struggling with, her movements precise and economical. He watched, surprised, as she then secured the new post with a knot he'd never seen, one that held with an unyielding grip. From that day, her presence became a quiet but powerful force on the ranch. She didn't speak much, but her actions spoke volumes. She seemed to anticipate Hank's needs, appearing with a bucket of fresh water as he mended a bridle or silently guiding a wayward steer back to the herd. Hank, initially hesitant to accept her help, soon found himself relying on her uncanny instincts. Her true connection to the land and its creatures, however, shone brightest with the horses. He'd found her one evening, not in the cabin, but in the stable, a small mare's head resting gently against her shoulder. The skittish animal, usually wary of strangers, stood calm and still under Nahimina's touch. Later, as he watched her saddle one of his wildest geldings, her hands moving with an almost spiritual grace, he realized this was no ordinary woman. She spoke to the horse in soft, guttural murmurs, her voice a low thrum that seemed to soothe the beast. The gelding, known for its unpredictable temperament, responded with an obedience Hank had rarely witnessed. He found himself observing her more often, the way her gaze swept the horizon, reading the subtle shifts in the wind, the almost imperceptible signs of changing weather. She knew where the best forage grew, where the deer would water, and how to coax a stray calf back to its mother with a quiet patience that bordered on miraculous. Her hands, once delicate in their stillness, now showed a remarkable strength, capable of turning heavy soil or lifting bales of hay with ease. Hank, a man who prided himself on his self-sufficiency, felt a strange, unfamiliar warmth unfurl in his chest. He was no longer alone on this vast, silent stretch of earth. The storm's test. The sky, a bruised purple an hour ago, now churned with an ominous, charcoal gray. A biting wind whipped across the plains, rattling the loose panes of glass in Hank's kitchen window. He'd seen storms before, but the air felt thick with a raw, primal energy he hadn't encountered in years. The horses whinnied nervously in the barn, their unease echoing Hank's own. He pulled on his oilskin slicker, the heavy fabric feeling inadequate against the brewing tempest. "Stay inside," he grunted to Nehemina, who stood by the door, her eyes fixed on the horizon. Her usual calm seemed undisturbed, yet a flicker of alertness was visible. He didn't wait for a response, stepping out into the rising gale. He was halfway to the barn when the first drops of rain, large and cold, began to fall. They quickly escalated into a deluge, driven horizontally by the wind. The old barn, a survivor of many seasons, groaned under the assault. Then came the sound Hank had dreaded, a sharp crack, followed by a ripping noise. A section of the roof, weakened by time and previous storms, was tearing loose. "No!" Hank yelled, his voice lost to the wind's roar. Water was pouring in, threatening to soak the hay and expose the animals to the brutal elements. He scrambled for a ladder, his mind racing for a solution. It was too dangerous to climb in this wind, but he couldn't just let the barn collapse. Just then, Nehemina was beside him, her face resolute. She pointed to a discarded length of heavy rope near the fence line. Her gaze met his, conveying a clear, unspoken plan. He understood instantly. He'd secure one end, she'd secure the other. "It's too much," Hank shouted, gesturing at the wind. The roof. Before he could finish, Nehemina was already scaling the side of the barn, her movements astonishingly agile despite the fierce gusts. Hank watched, incredulous, as she reached the damaged section. The wood was splintered, a large plank flapping wildly. With a grunt that was more determination than effort, she braced herself against the wall, reaching for the loose plank. Her muscles bunched, straining against the storm's fury, and with a raw demonstration of power, she pushed the plank back into place, holding it steady. Hank, spurred by her incredible feat, grabbed the rope and found a secure beam. He threw the other end to her. Nehemina, still holding the plank with one arm, caught the rope with the other. She looped it around the damaged section, her fingers working with remarkable speed and precision, and then tied it off with a knot he'd never seen before. The plank held. The immediate crisis was averted. As they both descended, soaked to the bone and shivering, Hank could only stare at her. Nehemina, breathing heavily, met his gaze, a hint of something unreadable in her eyes. The storm still raged, but the barn, saved by her impossible strength, stood firm. His admiration for her deepened, a silent, profound understanding passing between them in the chaos. Shared stories by firelight. The wind howled its final, frustrated notes as the last squall passed, leaving behind a world washed clean and glistening. Hank and Nehemina stood side by side, surveying their work. The makeshift repairs to the lean-to had held, the livestock were secure, and the worst of the fallen branches were cleared. A warmth, unfamiliar yet comforting, bloomed in Hank's chest as he looked at her. Her face, smudged with dirt and streaked with rain, held a quiet pride, a shared victory that transcended language. He felt a kinship solidifying between them, forged in the crucible of the storm. As twilight bled across the sky, painting the clouds in hues of bruised plum and fiery orange. They gathered by the rekindled fire. The flames danced, casting long, shifting shadows that made the familiar surroundings seem ancient and mysterious. Nehemina, after a moment of contemplation, began to sign. Her hands moved with a fluid grace, weaving a tale of a life once vibrant, a family rich with laughter and purpose. Then her gestures grew slower, heavier, depicting a sudden, brutal emptiness. A raiding party, a devastating fire, the loss of everything she had known. Her hands fell to her lap, her eyes, though unwavering, held the echo of a profound, enduring sorrow. The crackle of the fire was the only sound. Hank watched, a knot tightening in his own chest. He understood a loneliness so deep it became a part of one's very being. He cleared his throat, then slowly began to speak, his voice a low rumble against the night. He told of growing up without a mother, of a distant father, of a ranch that felt more like a burden than a home. He spoke of silent suppers, of long days spent alone with only the cattle for company, of the gnawing ache for connection that he'd long suppressed. He didn't use many words, but each one carried the weight of years. Nehemina watched him, her gaze intense, her understanding palpable even without a shared tongue. In the quiet understanding that settled between them, a fragile bridge formed, spanning the chasm of their different worlds. The firelight flickered, illuminating the shared vulnerability, the nascent hope. Shadows on the horizon. The afternoon sun, usually a benevolent presence, seemed to cast longer, more ominous shadows as a distant rumble grew on the horizon. Hank, mending a fence post near the creek, paused, his hammer still. He'd learned to discern the nuances of sound on his land, and this wasn't the familiar rhythm of cattle or the distant whisper of the wind. It was the heavier, more deliberate beat of horses approaching, and too many of them. Nehemina, who had been gathering herbs near the edge of the woods, also sensed the shift. Her head lifted, eyes narrowed as she watched the dust cloud bloom against the azure sky. A knot tightened in Hank's stomach. These weren't neighbors paying a friendly visit. Soon, 5 figures emerged from the shimmer of heat, riding hard and fast. Their faces were grimy, their expressions hard, and their eyes, even from a distance, seemed to bore into the heart of Hank's homestead. They slowed as they neared the main path leading to the cabin, their gazes sweeping over the modest ranch, lingering unpleasantly on Nehemina. One of them, a man with a scarred cheek and a menacing grin, spat on the ground. Hank dropped his hammer, his hand instinctively going to the well-worn rifle leaning against the fence. His heart pounded, not from fear for himself, but for Nehemina. He didn't speak, but his stance, shoulders squared, jaw set, communicated a clear message: not on my land. The men reined in their horses, forming a rough semicircle. Well, well, what have we here? The scarred man drawled, his eyes still fixed on Nehemina. Didn't know this old place had such exotic company. His leer was crude, his tone laced with venom. Nehemina, however, did not flinch. She stood tall, her gaze steady and unwavering, meeting each man's stare without a flicker of fear. There was a quiet power in her stillness, a regal defiance that seemed to emanate from her very being. Her eyes, dark and ancient, held a depth that spoke of generations of resilience, a spirit untamed. The scarred man's grin wavered. He hadn't expected such an unyielding presence. Hank, standing shoulder to shoulder with her, felt the subtle shift in the air. Her unwavering courage wasn't just a personal trait, it was a force. The men, who had ridden in with an air of entitlement and aggression, now hesitated. They exchanged uneasy glances. The quiet, stern rancher and the fearless woman beside him presented a formidable, unbreachable front. The leader grunted, a sound of frustration. "Ain't worth the trouble, boys," he muttered, more to himself than to them. With a final, lingering glare, he spurred his horse, and the others, clearly intimidated, followed suit, leaving nothing but a fading dust trail and the lingering scent of menace. A silent promise. The vast prairie sky enveloped them, a sprawling canvas dusted with an impossible number of stars. Each distant gleam seemed to pulse with an ancient narrative, a quiet witness to the unfolding of their own. Beside Nehemina, on the worn porch step, Hank felt the evening air cool and crisp against his skin, carrying the scent of dry earth and distant pine. He'd barely spoken since twilight, and Nehemina had maintained her own quiet vigil. Their silence, once a chasm, had become a comfortable bond, a space where understanding bloomed without a single uttered word. He stole a glance at her profile, softly lit by the faint starlight. Her posture remained regal, even in repose, her gaze fixed on the celestial tapestry. He noted the resilience etched along her jawline, the quiet strength that had seen her through so much. A profound, unfamiliar longing stirred within him. The thought of her leaving, a persistent whisper, had grown into a roar with each passing day. The ranch, once a solitary domain, now felt incomplete without her steady presence, her astute observations, the gentle cadence of her movements. Slowly, deliberately, Hank extended his hand. His calloused fingers brushed against hers, surprisingly warm and soft in the cool night. Nehemina didn't flinch, didn't withdraw. He took her hand fully, his thumb tracing the delicate lines on her palm, a gesture he hadn't made in years, one born of a profound, unspoken plea. He squeezed gently, pouring all his pent-up feelings into that simple touch, his gratitude, his admiration, his fervent wish for her to stay. He yearned to tell her she belonged here, that his home, his very life, felt richer with her in it, but the words snagged in his throat, too grand, too raw for his tongue. Nehemina turned her head, her dark eyes meeting his. In their depths, he saw not surprise, but a deep, knowing calm. A flicker of something tender, something akin to mutual understanding, passed between them. Then, with a pressure that mirrored his own, she squeezed his hand back. It was a firm, unwavering squeeze, a silent affirmation that resonated through him, settling the tumultuous thoughts in his mind. In that shared touch, beneath the watchful eyes of the stars, a promise was forged, unspoken, yet profoundly clear. It was a promise of presence, of connection, a delicate thread woven into the fabric of their unfolding future. A new beginning. The sun, a molten coin, dipped below the horizon, painting the vast plains in hues of fiery orange and deep violet. Hank watched it from his porch, a familiar ritual, but tonight, something was different. A warmth spread through him, not from the lingering heat of the day, but from within. He wasn't alone anymore. Inside, the soft glow of the oil lamp illuminated Nehemina as she carefully mended a tear in his worn work shirt. Her movements were precise, deliberate, each stitch a testament to her quiet strength. The air, once heavy with his solitary silence, now hummed with a comfortable quietude. He remembered the first time she'd looked at him, suspicion in her eyes, a wary animal assessing a threat. Now, when her gaze met his, it held a profound, unspoken understanding. Nehemina had arrived like a force of nature, battered yet unbroken. He'd nursed her back to health, a silent pact forming between them. She'd learned his rhythms, the subtle dips of his head that meant agreement, the way his eyes crinkled when he was amused. He, in turn, had come to recognize the slight tilt of her chin when she disapproved, the rare, soft smile that transformed her regal features. She wasn't just a guest, she was his anchor, his compass in the endless expanse. Together, they rebuilt. The scorched earth of the old farm, once a desolate reminder of loss, slowly yielded to their efforts. Nehemina, with a quiet determination that mirrored the plains themselves, helped him clear the stubborn brush, mend the fences, and coax life back into the parched soil. Her strength was astonishing, her spirit unwavering. He'd find her at dawn, already working, her movements fluid and powerful, a silhouette against the rising sun. One evening, as they sat by the crackling fire, the scent of cedar and sage filling the air, Nehemina reached out, her hand resting gently on his. It was a simple gesture, yet it spoke volumes. His calloused fingers closed around hers, a silent affirmation of their bond. The loneliness that had once defined his existence had receded, replaced by a profound sense of belonging. The plains, once a canvas for his solitude, now felt like a shared home, vast and welcoming. Their laughter, a new sound on the windswept land, mingled with the chirping of crickets, a melody of a new beginning. Love, quiet and steadfast, had taken root, flourishing in the heart of the wilderness.